So, Dr. Javenbach, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your research, your work with refugees, and then you and I will start having a conversation.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Mario. And it has been a great pleasure to know you and how passionate you are about what you're doing and how you turn your own pain to a cause and decided to become a wounded healer. I very much appreciate it because we can, I mean, we have a chapter about fear and meaning here, and we can create very different meanings about each experience. And the meaning we create for what happened to us or what we had done in the past can very much define what we will do from here on. And we are very strong creatures of meaning. When something moves us, it moves us like big mountains. And we can move big mountains when we have a cause, we have defined a meaning for our life and living. And I think one of the problems we have in this modern life is that a lot of it is missing. I always say, if you wake up, drive through garbage food, sit at a desk that you hate, drive through garbage food back home, lay on the couch and watch Fox or CNN, which tells you the whole world is going down in fire. And it's like putting a dog in a crate and closing the door and filling the crate with food, and there's no meaning here. How can my medication make any change in this person's life? So coming back to your question, first, I wanted to thank you all for being here. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do what you are doing. Just the fact you're sitting here, it takes a lot of courage that a lot of other ones of us don't have. So I'm a psychiatrist. I actually did my training at University of Michigan. I'm specialized in stress, trauma, anxiety, do research anything from changes to our genes based on the impact of trauma and stress. What happens in the brain, what happens in the body. We work with refugees who have come from Syria and Iraq, looking at parenting, the refugee kids, looking at the basically long-term impact of war exposure in kids, their parents, body changes, brain changes. We have some cool art and dance and movement therapies for the kids, which have been very effective. Right now, we have expanded them across the state of Michigan. We work with the state of Michigan, training schools how to work with refugee children, whether they come from Afghanistan and Ukraine right now. We work with first responders across the state of Michigan, police, fire, EMTs, dispatcher. This is another very highly trauma-exposed group of civilians. Anything from training, prevention, treatment. We have some very cool future technologies. Mario tried it. You wear these goggles, which are like sunglasses. And I see all of you, and this digital human walks in and starts conversation with me. We use that for treatment. And I'm proud to say I'm the inventor, and this is our lab is in Michigan is the birthplace of this technology in the world. And some other work we do look at the impact of high intensity interval training, exercise on mental health. That's why, like, we do look at fitness boxing and how it helps with mental health. I also work in the clinic. I practice. I work with all different kind of people with trauma backgrounds, mostly survivors of torture, human trafficking, refugees, first responders, those who have seen the worst of what humans do to each other and themselves. So I've seen the dark side of humanity also, as a lot of you have had other exposures to the dark side of human life. And on the side, I am engaged in basically public education. I write for the media. I do talks with radios, TVs, and this book was a part of that. At some point, I was like, I talk to people all the time. I teach my patients. I train them about how exercise helps with their brain growth and this and that thing. How about I sit down and write it? It was not easy to write this at nights and over the weekends or a full year after my academic work. Actually, I think I told you the story. For the past 2 weeks, I had to just take off, go next to the mountains in Tucson, Arizona, and sit next to the cacti and finish the book. So it's a pleasure to be here. I don't want to bore you more about what I'm doing with my life and talk more about would be interesting to you about fear and anxiety. And I think here we are talking about two very primitive, very deeply rooted systems. We are talking about the reward system in the brain, which is the addiction, and we talk about the fear system, and both of them are as old as life. Like my colleagues are looking at the brains of rats and mice to understand how addiction and trauma and fear work in humans. And I mean, it's not, I don't have to explain much how these are very subconscious automatic behaviors, right? You all have done this or seen. You pick up the phone, you go on Facebook, then you go on Instagram and scroll, you go on Twitter and scroll, you put it down, immediately you pick it up. It's as if an ape sitting in you doing it, or a mouse sitting in you hitting the lever, right?
Cat claws dog.
Yes, same applies to fear and anxiety. A lot of our fear responses are automatic. Let's say I was an anxious person. I was worried of public speaking. And I came here, he's very nice and kind, but I'm sitting here, my heart is pounding, my hands are sweaty, my breathing is difficult.
Is this for real?
Mom's spaghetti on your sweater. No. So what I'm saying is that, no, if I were nervous about public speaking, all these would be happening in me. And from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense that a system which is designed to protect me, millions of years of evolution or system to protect me, is now working against me, right? So we have to see it in the context it has evolved in. The reality is that the fear system, and a big chunk of our confusion with fear and anxiety, is that this is a system which is very archaic. This evolved to do fight and flight and freeze. It was evolved to protect us against him throwing a rock at me, or a predator attacking me, or natural disasters happening, right? So in that context, if right now I'm talking to a group of my tribe mates, if there's a cave woman sitting inside of me and looking at what's happening and getting terrified. So if my tribe mates don't like me, chances are high in a matter of minutes, one of us would be injured, or I would be exiled or killed. So that's why my heart's pounding, getting me ready to go. So a lot of confusions of the system in the modern world is that the hardware and the software don't match each other. This caveman, cavewoman is confused about what's going on around us.
Confused from the perspective of how the world is evolving. From what perspective, Arash? From the social media, from just, I know it's not just social media, but from what other perspectives? How busy we are, how, you know.
So the fear circuitry was designed to say, there's a danger here, run away from it, or attack it, or freeze because you don't have any other options. Now I have a difficult meeting with my boss tomorrow. And it's a very abstract kind of threat. That threat is that I may lose some privilege, I may lose a promotion, I may lose some, I don't know, worst case, I will lose my job, but I'm not dying. But this fear system is reacting as if I'm about to get killed by that boss. Same applies to a lot of other threats. And now coming to the social media, the challenge is that specifically post-COVID time, a lot of what we learn about the world is not about the reality of the world. It's about through the social media. And before that was through the media, right? How do you, right now between Palestine and Israel, things are happening. How do you and I know about it? I know it through the media. We don't have any firsthand information about what's happening, and it is not possible for us to have firsthand information. So it used to be media. I mean, I'm new to America. I've been here for 15 years, but I've heard in the past there was a time that media would tell you the news. But now it's a sensational, emotional, basically interpretation of what's happening, right? 24/7. And regardless, and I'm impartial politically, regardless of what TV media channel you open, it's telling you with highly intense emotions that everything is in a terrible case. That then you go on social media, and the thing is that with the algorithms they've learned. So the media and social media are corporations. You're a businessman, you know, for any corporation, the top priority is not informing, is not being nice, is not being ethical, there's that revenue. At the end of the day, shareholders come and ask, how much money did you make? And for any of these corporations to make revenue, they want you to They have to make you to be like that rat hitting the lever. Because the more you click, the more you scroll, the more you pause on that image, the more you're bringing revenue, right? And you have seen like this, and they're getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Like when you pause on an Instagram post immediately for 2 seconds, immediately you see things related to it come up. So not that there is an evil agenda behind it. The idea is that you got to make money out of these humans. It's like, it reminds me of the Matrix, that each human turned to like a energy cell or a battery. So your job here is to generate clicks, not generate electricity.
And then, Arash, too, they tweak that algorithm so that if, for example, you're vaping and you click on a vaping link or something, they'll hit you with multiple links to vape, not passing judgment on vaping or anything, but
or anything that they
clothing.
estimate relate to that kind of lifestyle that they have predicted, right? And this algorithms have determined that anything emotional and sensational will receive more clicks. Anything that is sad, anything that is it triggers anger or fear, and then you get pushed more and more towards those. And I mean, during the COVID, just imagine how you were feeling during the COVID time. All your exposure to what is out there was through the media and social media. And and it's a balance between fear and addiction circuitry, fear and reward circuitry. Click, 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 with engagement of your negative emotions. So it becomes the worst of what you can. And I don't have to tell you it has become the worst, because each of you, each single one of you here, unless you have a flip phone, are spending a lot of time, more than you want, and more than is reasonable and logical, including myself, more than is reasonable and logical on these things. So we have basically a lot of addictive material, except it's not regulated. It's on the table everywhere.
Mine's there too.
Yeah.
So, Arash, one of the things that when I was reading your book, and I kind of understood this, but I really didn't have it laid out the way you did, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's trauma, and then symptoms of trauma is anxiety, stress, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with trauma.
Yes.
And I just kind of lumped them all together, which is incorrect. There's root cause, and then there are symptoms of that root cause, which is why if you're battling an addiction, you really have to focus on that trauma. And if you could take as much time as you want to talk about trauma, how it manifests, and for people in general, what they need to do to get through that, and especially for people in recovery.
Absolutely. And midtime advertisements. If you read the book and you liked it, I appreciate leaving a review on Amazon, because there's a lot of garbage there written by unprofessionals. This is what I'm learning now. I like it. A lot of misinformation. So it will help it move itself to where people would see it. But coming to trauma, and it's a spectrum, right? From adverse experiences, stressful experiences, difficult experiences, and what we define trauma as trauma, which is horribly scary, dangerous experiences that could threaten someone's physical or sexual integrity or life. So we're talking about shooting, robbery, war, natural disasters, serious motor vehicle accidents, serious life-threatening illness, rape, shooting, which we have a lot of. So these are traumatic experiences, and as you said, they're too common. About half of Americans have had some traumatic exposure throughout their life. So trauma is there, and then there are different ways we react to trauma. We all have heard post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, which is the extreme of it, but then there's degrees of trauma reaction. It could be as little as, just think of the worst experience you have ever had in your life. Immediately you feel the emotion, right? As little as the emotions keep coming to you, to having flashbacks and nightmares and always being on alert and watch and feeling very anxious and terrified and avoiding anything that resembles the trauma, anything that could be a reminder of the traumatic experience. And even avoiding the time of the day or year this happened, the place it happened, people who could be related to it. But so people usually see PTSD as the only outcome of the trauma, but trauma, as you mentioned earlier, has a lot of faces: depression, anxiety, social avoidance. And when it comes to addiction, I'm not an addiction specialist, but anytime I have someone with an addiction, I ask some dance to remember, some dance to forget. Why did you do this? How is this helping you? And for a lot of people, for some people, it's just for the fun of it. But for a lot of people, it's kind of a self-medication.
Yeah.
I didn't find any better way to get rid of this problem. And for me as a psychiatrist, if I can find that original problem, then I address that with safer ways of treatment. So the person automatically would have less desire to use the drug. So it's extremely common, and it can impact not only our biology, nightmares and flashbacks, but also someone's worldview. A lot of people who have been exposed to traumatic experiences, their world changes. They believe that the world is not fair, the world is not safe anymore. Why did this happen to me? Why out of everyone else this happened to me? I'm not a good person anymore. I'm not complete anymore. I'm someone to be ashamed of. I am guilty. A lot of these things, as I said, I worked with a lot of first responders. I had this police officer whose partner was shot in front of her, and she had to sit there holding her fingers on his jugular until he died. And she carries this survivor's guilt for years with herself. And a lot of us who have lost someone, and the way a human brain works is very confusing a lot of times. I keep thinking about what could have I done? Why didn't I do this, or why did I do that? And of course, hindsight is 20/20. And in reality, even if I go back in time travel and change my behavior, things may not change. So the person's worldview and ideology changes. If I'm a religious person, why did God allow this to happen to me, right?
Arash,
Yeah.
how long did it take that the officer to reach out and say, I need help?
Very important question. 9 years.
Oof.
So this person was having
So-
nightmares and flashbacks and avoidance and crying and severe depression for 9 years before. And because you said it earlier, stigma. Oh, I'm a weak person and that this happened to me.
Especially law enforcement people.
Especially because you have to show that
Yeah.
you're a tough person. I mean, culture is gradually changing with the younger people joining the force, and superiors are starting to understand it's not a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
We all are vulnerable to trauma impact. We all. And if trauma is severe enough, I mean, in survivors of torture, up to 80% develop full-blown PTSD.
Yeah.
A lot more have other symptoms.
If anybody has questions, we're going to take questions at the end. But for those of you who are participating virtually, just put your question in the chat feature. And Brandon, if you could put our survey in the chat feature too. We really do look at the questions in the survey to better identify topics that are relevant, timely, and then we go get awesome speakers like Arash to come and educate us all. So Brandon, if you could put that in the chat feature, and if you guys could take the time to fill that out later, that would be awesome. So I will tell you, Arash, I don't think I shared this with you. I haven't shared this with a lot of people, but not long before my son died, we were texting, and he stopped texting me. And so when people don't get back to me via text, I got a problem with that. So please always get back to me as soon as you can. Okay. But that's an example of how it can impact you. And then I found out he died. And I was calling Uber to tell me, you got to tell me where you took my kid. And they wouldn't, for privacy reasons. And there was nothing I could do. He was in California. I was here. And that was the worst day of my life. And I will tell you, we all have something like that that happens. And you got to reach out and ask for help. And one of the things I do is I meditate. It's good for me. I feel so good after I'm done. And I try to do it every day, but I don't. And our yoga instructor, Chelsea, has been asking me to go for yoga and recovery right here. I mean, I helped found it. And you want to know why I don't go, Arash? Because I don't want anybody looking at me doing crazy poses. But I'm committed to going. Chelsea, if you're online, I'm coming, and I'm going to do that before the end of the year, I promise. But so those are the types of things that I think about that every day, and I don't have an addiction. And you've got to reach out for help. And I guess when these people that you work with, how did they come to you? How, like the officer, what do you put word out there? What do you recommend? And another interesting thing I'd like to have you address is that, is it ever disproportionately like by gender? Do more women reach out and ask for help? Or do guys, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So now I need 3 hours to address all of what you have said.
Okay, so
First, I mean, as if it means anything, I'm again very sorry for what you had to go through. Nobody deserves to go through the things that we go through in life, including what you did. And our brain tries to make sense of the world, tries to understand and feel a sense of control over the world, which is so uncontrollable. You just brought an example of how much little control we have even on the life of our loved ones, right? And the mind tries to say, okay, if you don't receive a text, that means something bad may happen, and creates this new learning, right? If this happens, then it predicts this. A lot of times those don't make sense because these are automatic learnings of the mind. You talked about yoga. I want to say, if I were to give anybody here one advice, exercise is one of the most important investments in your life. We are so stupid, all of us, including myself, that exercise is the last priority and seen as a leisure or luxury activity. But this is one only thing that you may get divorced, you may lose people, you may lose your job, you will get retired. This is the only thing that's going to be with you until you enter the grave. And if you look up my name and exercise pill, I have a whole article about it, about how exercise even causes growth in emotion regulation and memory areas of the brain. They get bigger. So this is one of the most important things you can do for your mental health. And please don't do it for weight loss, because weight loss is diet. If you did work out and didn't lose weight, don't lose hope, because exercise is not for losing weight. It's for being healthy. I also want to do a 2-minute mindfulness practice, but
okay.
Addressing your question. So number one, PTSD and trauma consequences are more common among women than men, almost twice. We don't know still why. In terms of receiving health care, it depends. Like with first responders that I'm seeing, like I work with Detroit police, and these poor people see the worst of humanity every single day. And they are mostly referred by their peers. Let's say one of their peers has worked with us and they know, and we have a statewide program. They work with us and they know it's helping and working. And then they're like, okay, how about you go? And I'm so happy that they're becoming more and more open and aware of this. They understand this as a human problem, not as a weakness. And sometimes the departments refer them, but in the community, I think one of the problems is that people don't know. A lot of people, like I've had cops and firefighters who thought, well, this is the life of a police or a firefighter. You have to have nightmares and flashbacks and drink yourself to sleep. So, but then when they know, oh no. So the first step is to know something is abnormal. And a lot of people don't know that. The second step is to understand there's a way out of it. A lot of people, and you talked about stigma, a lot of people avoid accepting a problem because they see it as a cancer. If I told you you have common cold versus I told you have cancer, your approach to it would be different. You would be more resisting the cancer diagnosis. For me, that's why I tell people, like I had this, one of the first responders told me, he was doing an interview with TV about his journey, and he was like, I'd seen other providers who told me, this is your new identity, you got to live with it for the rest of your life. But when I saw this guy, me, which I didn't remember, he said, after we had conversations, he smiled and said, we're going to fix this. And at that moment, quote, I felt my feet, I stood on them, and I fought and I fixed it, end quote. So there is hope. And if we can deliver the message of hope to people, then they will move. And message of hope is what you see how it works in politics, whether for the good or for fooling people. So if we can give hope to people about the realities of how we can make things better, that helps a lot. Can we do the couple, whenever you're ready, we can do 2 minutes of mindfulness
We're going to
practice.
do a 2-minute mindfulness exercise with Dr. Javenbach, but to let everybody know, both here, streaming in on Facebook, and participating via Zoom, we have Yoga for Recovery. I mentioned I'm being recruited to go to that, and I will, but it's every Wednesday. It's awesome. We also have Exercise for Recovery. We do that in partnership with Orange Theory. There are 2 locations here in Ann Arbor. And the reason we picked Orange Theory, because we could have went to Powerhouse or some other place, Anytime Fitness, but we picked Orange Theory because you have to register to participate in a class. You participate in a class. It's a sense of community. Okay. There's healthy competition. I remember somebody telling me that they participated and they strap something on your bicep or somewhere that your vitals, a few of them appear on a TV screen, and that you're comparing yourself with the other vitals, and which is good. There's camaraderie. You are accountable for showing up. And that's why we picked Orange Theory. You can't just slide a car and walk in. And before we do the meditation exercise with Arash, there is a fascinating, I think it's a 3-part series on the blue zones, which is where people live to be old. I mean, 90, 95, 100, 105. And they talked about the usual stuff, Arash, eat right, exercise, all that stuff. But what struck me was when they asked this woman from Japan, to what do you attribute your longevity? And she didn't say, I eat right, I exercise, I meditate. She said, my support, my community, my friends who look out for me. We get together all the time. I watch their back, they watch mine. And if you're battling an addiction, you need that sense of community. So with that though, why don't we do our 2-minute awareness of breath? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And community. I totally agree.
Okay.
So see, we are very social creatures.
Yeah.
We are so social. If we put any of you in the brain scanner and show you a black and white, sexless face of a human with a smile or with a frown, your brain, your amygdala will light up, and I can see it in the brain scanner. And you're bored and sleep in the scanner, you don't even know this is happening in you. We are that socially attuned. So just a quick practice, and I will say after we do why we do this. Please, each of you pay very close attention, and then with your fingers show me how many sounds you're able to hear right now.
You say raise your finger.
Yeah. Okay. Pay close attention around you. And with your fingers, show me how many colors you can see in this room. How many colors? Sorry, how many immigrant color? How many colors do you see? Count them in your head. And for those who are at home, you can do it at home. So feel your shoes. No, you don't have to touch it with your feet. Feel the shoes with your feet. Feel every part of it. Feel every little tiny bit of your shoes. There are parts that are harder on your feet. There are parts that are softer. There are parts your feet are not even touching the shoe. Feel the floor. Touch your sleeve. And think about the details, the temperature, the texture, how it is feeling on your arm. So while we were doing this practice, probably 1 minute, how much did you think about your problems and what's outside of here? This is mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't have to be lighting candles in your basement in darkness. So, and I will say why this is important. We are advanced animals with the capability of reflecting on the past and planning for the future. This has served us amazingly, right? We have science and technology because of that. But the problem is that this has become our life. Right now, at this very moment, you and I are talking, part of you and part of me is not in this room. Thinking about what's past, how I'm going to drive home, what's the problem tomorrow at work, this thing I have with my partner, that thing, and a lot of anxieties and a lot of pains come from that. But what if I told you something you already knew, but you had forgotten? The only real moment in my life and your life is this very moment. The second you walked in this room and the second you will walk out of this room don't exist. It's just some neural activity in your head. But our brains, our minds are so confused that even when you think about the moment that happened 2 hours ago or 5 years ago, you still feel the tension, you still feel the negative emotions. Mindfulness is a practice of using our senses to anchor us in here and now, which is most of the times the safest moment, right? And this is a practice that if you keep doing it, and there's tons of it everywhere, guided mindfulness here, there, don't have to do anything weird, just using your senses, whether in your body or outside, to bring you here and now. And that can be very helpful at the times that you need it, to bring you back and anchor you in the reality of here and now, and getting a lot of sense of control, because then that is who you is doing it.
Thank you for that. And there is an awareness of breath exercise that I do. It's about 5 to 6 minutes long. It's not long, but the woman that I'm listening to vis-a-vis my app, there's even a part of it toward the end of Rush where she says at around this time, you might be drifting off and it's time to come back.
Mhm.
And 90% of the time, I'm way out there drifting off. And when I hear her soothing voice, like, oh, yeah, okay, I gotta get back to business here. And then she dings that bell and it's over and I start my day better than before it started. So that's for real, you guys. You know, we ran statistics on our demographic at our Yoga for Recovery, and I would have guessed that it was 80-20. Women, guys, women 80, guys. It's like 50-50 men and women, which blew me away. And I'm really proud of Washtenaw County guys for supporting Yoga for Recovery. It's awesome. So, yeah. So it's exercise, yoga.
Can I say a word? Another word?
Yeah,
Do
absolutely.
we have time?
Yeah,
Just
we
feel-
have plenty of time.
So when you try to sit with yourself, I have been contemplating or thinking about this. You try to sit down and be quiet, right? everybody says this is good, helps so much. We get so restless after 2 minutes, right? Not even like 1 hour, 3 hours, 2 minutes. You can be on this stupid thing for 10 hours and not get restless. You want to sit down with yourself for 1 or 2 minutes. You want to run away, right? And I've been thinking, why? And one of my theories is that there is a part of us that we don't want. And I'll tell you why. Because so when you open your eyes to this world, the only thing and the only face you don't see is your own face. All you see for a long time, months and years, is the face of people acting towards you and reacting to you. And you perceive yourself as of that. And the parents, the culture, religion, teachers, this, that, keep telling you what you are and what you should be. And I'm not preaching, that's the reality. I conceived an identity and understanding of myself based on all of that feedback. Before that, I didn't know anything. I'm just this tiny thing, and these gods in front of me are telling what the world is and what I am. And there is a part of me which even I see as a dirty, ugly, unacceptable animal or unlikable thing that I've pushed away because of that, because there was part of me that people didn't like and wanted to civilize. And I think part of our pains and part of our anxieties is that. And when I want to sit down with myself, it means I'm sitting down with all of me, including what I've pushed away, which not necessarily is a bad thing. A lot of things is an amazing creative thing. But my mom didn't like it. My dad didn't like it. My, I don't know, Catholic school nun didn't like it. And I've pushed it away. And I think part of if we can go through, I always say the way beyond fear is through fear. Sit with yourself and go through that. Good things come out, not bad things.
One of the things we have right here, how does addiction in our flyer worsen anxiety? What's the answer to that, Arash?
A lot. So the thing is that, let me just use an example of cocaine use. People, I've never used cocaine. People who use cocaine, it's amazing feelings because it's as if you are, let's say you get your paycheck and spend it all in 1 hour, right? So it's, you can do a lot of things with your paycheck in 1 hour, but for the rest of the month, the 29 days and 23 hours, you don't have any money. And I have seen in the hospital, people crashing after cocaine use, they're sleeping in the bed for 2 hours because the whole brain is drained and there's depression. So, but over time, people get more anxious. Because the brain has to, because this is something unusual and abnormal introduced to the brain. It's fighting and trying to upregulate itself. And the problem that happens is that it needs more and more of its own chemicals and neurotransmitters to create the same even the normal reaction. And that leads it to a lot of anxiety. That's the neuroscience, brain science explanation, but there's a much more simple explanation also. Addiction causes a lot of social, psychological, occupational problems that all of which can lead to anxiety. My spouse, I get into fights with them. I cannot deal with my kids comfortably. I cannot go to work. Now I have to go all the addiction behaviors in work. And also I have associated a good feeling with the drug. And now I cannot have the good feeling without the drug. So I have to keep going there to get the normal average good feeling. And the other problem here is that because we have, let me use an example. The first time you kissed your wife.
Was awesome. Underneath the ambassador.
I know you love her very much, but the kisses are never going to be the first time. No kiss will be the first kiss, right? So unless the first kiss was a bad kiss. But here the thing is that addiction, so we get used to things, right? Addiction makes this getting used very tragic and very exponential. So now a normal life activity, which would usually calm me down or make me less anxious or give me joy, does not do that anymore, because the threshold is now in a very different place to get the normal joys of life or not getting the anxieties of life. And that's how addiction can work. And that's why, like, some people start alcohol use to reduce their anxiety. But at the end of the day, the outcome is that they will become more anxious in the long run.
Okay, so we're going to start taking questions here shortly. Do we have questions coming in? Whoa, yeah, there's a lot of things in the chat feature. I just want to share this with you, and I'll try to get through this quickly because we want to have time for questions. But so I'm on the State of Michigan Opioid Settlement Committee. It's in Lansing. I live near here in Brighton. Our meetings typically start at 10 a.m.
Mhm.
I run out the door without my coffee. And I'm not saying this to be humorous. This actually happened. I wanted that coffee. And I was looking at my watch, thinking if I stop at Dunkin' Donuts, there's a chance I'm going to be late.
Mhm.
And it's reported publicly in the notes. Commissioner Nanos arrived at whatever.
Mhm.
Now, I know that public flogging is going to come if I stop for that coffee. So I pull up to Dunkin'. Oh, it gets worse, David. I pull up to Dunkin', and there's a line 10 cars deep. So, you know, and I'm thinking I'm going to outsmart the line. I'm going to go wait inside. I'm looking at my watch. It's about a 45-minute drive to Lansing. And I go inside and it's about 4 or 5 people deep. I know I'm going to get publicly flogged. And I'm waiting in line and my anxiety is heightening waiting in line. But I got to get that coffee in my hand, double. I get the coffee. Now I'm going to be behind. And I start speeding down I-96 to get to Lansing. And I text our wonderful, Tara's her name. She's incredible. She helps keep us organized on the committee. And I said, I'm running behind. And that ain't good. And that's just caffeine. I gotta believe that it's much worse. Well, I know it is for heroin. You said cocaine. And that feeling that I had, that's identical to what people with a very serious addiction are going through.
Why did you ask me this question? You answered it the best way possible yourself.
Yeah, well,
That's the best example. There's an animal inside of each of us. That animal either is scared of something or wants something. Imagine, I say the metaphor is, imagine you have a Great Pyrenees. I have Great Pyrenees dog with you. And this dog sees, let's say my dog is male and sees a female Pyrenees. It pulls me. The dog is terrified of something.
Yeah.
It runs away. And it's the bigger that desire is, or the fear, the harder it is to control the animal. So a lot of times the way out of it is to distract the animal from it. And your example was the best to show how there's a logical brain and this desire.
it's crazy.
And negotiate.
And so the way I'm going to deal with it next time is I'm going to have a cup of coffee before I go so that is satiated, for lack of a better term, and leave earlier.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to think about that. You know, all of you are.
And something that a lot of times here, I will finish, is helps a lot is, so I had this police officer, she was assaulted and she has PTSD. She was doing even grocery shopping online. You know what? She would take her out of home to go to her kids' games events because that was a huge motivation and meaning for her. If that meeting in Lansing had some emotional intensity for you at that very moment, it would be much easier to fight the desire for coffee. So that's why I talk a lot about finding what really matters to you and turning it, like you see how what matters to you has mobilized you to mobilize the community, right? And we can consciously try to find that and remind ourselves, and that becomes a compass. they can help us in the fight a lot of
The,
times.
the
I'll shut up
crazy thing is though, that meeting does matter to me.
now. It does. I know, it
I-
does. And that's
I-
why you were contemplating, but it was a much stronger emotional theme there. It would be easier to fight.
Yeah, I hear you. So boy, am I going to get it from my fellow commissioners. So look, we've got a lot of questions, I think, if somebody, yeah. Yeah, first, are there any questions from here? Okay,
This gentleman. has a
we've got
question.
questions right here.
Hi, I'm Mary. So I've been a nurse for almost 40 years, and I've also been giving anesthesia for, I don't know, 27, 28 years. And I've seen a lot of traumatic things in my career. We're finally in our field starting to look at something called the second victim. So that when you observe something bad happen to someone else and you're an empathetic person, you don't then become the second victim and carry that trauma back home with yourself. So I'm really proud that that's starting, but it's only been 2 years, right? So anyway, I just wanted to let you know about that and see if you had any knowledge about second victim.
So my understanding from your question is you're talking about vicarious exposure to trauma, correct? So, and first, before we get to all other questions, I want to apologize to say I will not be able to answer personal questions about your own personal, let's say I have this anxiety or I have this phobia, what to do with it, because because I would prefer to talk about things that everybody can benefit from. So the good example is emergency personnel, first responders we talk about. So one way, actually, one of the, even in the book, the definition of PTSD includes not only personal experience, but also repeated exposure to other people's trauma from close. Like the first responders who go and clean a school after a shooting, they see the worst of the things. And the stories I've heard from these guys, I don't want to even talk about. I personally, my specialty is trauma, survivors of torture, human trafficking. First, all the time I hear their stories. And that really hurts sometimes. But how I have been able to, because I've been asked this question, how do you deal with it? Because like reality, at some point you start to doubt the humanity. But, and then you can have, there have been times that I heard a story of a survivor of torture, and for a few days I was nauseous. But what helps me a lot is, number one, gradual, at some point you learn to leave work at work and go home. Sometimes it doesn't leave you alone, but then talking to people, talking to friends, family, it doesn't have to necessarily be about the tough things that I saw and exposing them to it, but just the distraction, exercise, the time that 1 hour ago I go hit the bag, I cannot think about anything else. But mostly, and I've been thinking about this, the most important thing that helps me a lot is, again, the meaning that I've created for this, the reason I do this. So I see a broken human in front of me and it breaks me, but reminding myself that in a few weeks or months, this human will be back to a big extent on their feet and to their life, that has been an extremely protective factor for me against the trauma.
Go ahead. Yeah, so I just have a comment and then a question. So I was fascinated by Mario's coffee story and trying to predict where he was going with it. And I was thinking like what I would do. So I would have walked into the room and lied and said, oh, I got a traffic ticket. I'm really sorry. And everybody would have been happy with it. I'm thinking, person has an addiction. My son had an addiction. And he's been lying to me. I didn't know he had an addiction. I mean, I found him on the floor dead. I didn't even know he was using. And a lot of times I have to go back and think about it. He's been lying to me. And I say, why is your nose, Ron, do you have a cold? No, he's probably sniffing something. And I'm thinking, you know, I always would think to myself, why didn't he come to me? I would have done anything for him, just like every parent. And the only thing I come up with is one, he was so embarrassed he couldn't, or didn't think I would understand, or both. I'll never know. That's my comment. My question is this. Are you familiar, you have any experience reading or personal with the use of cannabis or psilocybin for treating these types of depressions and PTSD? I know it's very big in the news and people doing clinical studies. I'm wondering maybe if you could talk about that a little bit, if you have experience.
So first, I'm really sorry for your loss, if that means anything, because I'm just saying words, and to you, it's a very different matter. And I mean, addiction and fear, these are again going to the primitive functions of these conditions. They hijack any logical behavior. At that time, it's very hard to even interpret things. Why something happened or didn't happen? And I hope that will be consoling to you to some level to know that trauma, addiction don't understand logic, don't understand what makes sense, because we are talking about something very primitive, subconscious working inside of me. A lot of us don't want it. Coming back to the coffee story, I want to go there, but this thing is pulling me here. But coming back to the cannabis and others, and psilocybin, and some the people talk about ketamine now. So it is not my direct research. With cannabis, I have some, I mean, people are researching, so we don't have any conclusive answer now that I can rely on and say, okay, I want to prescribe cannabis to people. But my answer is, if something has been around for centuries, if it was doing it, we wouldn't be doing psychopharmacology, because what works will work and everybody will use it, and then we wouldn't have a problem with trauma and depression. Does it work with subgroup of people? I don't know. But then there are other risks that we are worried about. But specifically with ketamine, I'm concerned and I'm worried that we take someone to the hospital, give them something that just takes away all the depression all of a sudden, and send him home. And I don't know if they will go on the street and look for something that gave them the best experience. With the psychedelics, there's some more news coming out, especially with PTSD. I mean, the hopeful news about them is that they don't seem to be as addictive as other experiences. But again, the thing is, it's not that the psychedelic itself fixes the problem. The thing is that the psychedelic is assisting a therapy that is done. So the caution should be like, we don't want basement therapists and shamans starting to try to treat people with psychedelics because when the trauma memory comes up, it's vulnerable to change. And that change could be in a positive direction or a negative direction. I mean, the wrong hands could get worse. But one of the things psychedelics I've heard from a lot of people who have done the experience is that it basically takes you to a different perspective that might be helpful in future. Again, as a scientist, I cannot make a claim either way, because the psychedelic research seems to be hopeful. Psychedelic assisted therapy with a therapist who knows what they're doing. The rest, I cannot make it like a solid comment. I can have personal opinions, but oh yeah.
And if it does work, how it works, maybe with derivatives or some kind of a synthetic modification that can make it work. We need to do the science for all of these things. So it is not just word to word, person, which could create a lot of problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the science is being done. The research is being done with the cannabinoids. Actually, at Wayne State University, I have colleagues who are doing cannabinoid research with trauma, and then there's psychedelic research is blooming more and more. And there's historical theme about why alcohol was allowed, and psychedelics were not allowed, what nicotine was. So that's a longer story. Sure, my pleasure.
So Doc, Doc, I have a question. So Mary, she brought up PTSD or trauma from the perspective of like the person assisting someone who may have experienced a traumatic experience. And I was thinking, have you looked into or done any research from the perspective of military members who may have inflicted trauma on other people and how that affects them, or perhaps even like law enforcement, or whether it be a police officer or judges who consistently sentence people to like really long sentences, knowing how much is going to affect them and their families, or how that type of trauma from the perspective of someone who puts it on another person may connect to maybe like family members who possibly had to make some really difficult decisions with their family members, and maybe their family member overdosed and died, and they experienced um, the grief or
Guilt.
the guilt,
Yeah.
the guilt of maybe I
Mhm.
should have done something different. Maybe I should not have been so strict. And that can cause trauma as well. Have you looked at trauma from these other perspectives?
So, thank you for the good question. And so part of your question is about what I have done that was very wrong, right? Let's say I was a military personnel somewhere and I killed some innocent people, right? Or I was a police officer and I inflicted pain on someone. So part could be if it was intentional versus if it was accidental. I have, if your answer is I've seen people dealing with these challenges for years and decades afterward, yes, I have talk to military people who were suffering what they had done at the height of the moment or at the direction of their partners or their superiors. Some people, and this is very complicated conversation because some people might even do it under ideological, basically guidances, right? They may for the rest of their life believe what they did was right. I mean, we see people go get themselves killed over what they believe, and that may be right or that may be wrong, right? So, but coming to the more practical aspect for us, which is like I had lost a family member. And now I'm thinking, and this I see it a lot in first responders, right? I have this firefighter who is like, okay, I did a CPR on that baby, the baby died. What could I have done? I still am thinking. In reality, number one fact is hindsight is 20/20. And even with that, I can go back and do the things that I think I should have done, and still the person could have lost their life, right? And again, I'm talking this about the family members, which may make it more related to what we are talking about here. But the other part is, so one of the facts about being human is that we have very limited control over what is happening around us. This is a fact. It sounds cliche, but this is a fact that every single one of us might step outside of here and get hit by a car and die. Die, not get injured, right? My mom always told me it's terrifying to know a piece of you walking around without you control and they can do whatever they wanted to, which she was talking about myself. And she was not very happy with the way I carry myself. Not that I was doing wrong things. It was just we disagreed on a lot of things. So the reality of life is that we have very limited control on other people's life. There are things that other people do or do not do, and how much can I control myself? So going back to the coffee story, all of us have that limited control on our own actions, let alone someone else's action. And specifically in the context that you were talking, this man says he didn't know at all what was happening there. How could he have done what, right? Any of you have children and you don't know, or you may know, but so, and accepting the fact that I have very limited control is terrifying first, but then it's very liberating. Because if you come to terms with that fact, your life will be much easier and the pain and agony which will be much less. So what I say to people, what I say to that, like a first responder who lost her partner, she was feeling guilty. She didn't want to enjoy life because of what happened to her. And my answer to her was, now you are responsible for enjoying life for two people, for yourself and the person who left. I think that's the meaning that had to be created. My feeling of guilt and crying and being sad and not letting myself enjoy life is not going to help the person who left. I have to enjoy it twice now for both of us.
Arash, Tyler, if we scroll up, Brandon, he had a question or a comment. I don't know if we're going up or down. I want to address these questions. Dr. Javenbach, in your own experience, what have you found to be the best approach to addressing insecurities within yourself, especially when considering personal trauma and past experiences that you can't seem to handle? And then he follows up, I understand that may be a vague question to answer. I guess I mean to say, how do you accept things within yourself to a point where you feel that you have the strength to ask for help?
It's a lifelong process of getting familiar and comfortable with oneself. I think it's a journey. We all are in it. I don't claim that I've been able to, but I mean, one thing that helped me was in my profession. One thing, another thing that helped me was my curiosity about myself and others. As much as I want to learn about you, I want to learn about myself. And also what would help seek, like in terms of insecurities in myself, I had a very good thought and I lost it.
Does Marna help you?
You know, you just said about how relationships help. It does help, yeah. But at the end of the day, it's very important to come from within and inside, because otherwise, Marina could be here, could be not be here, could be in a good mood, could be in a bad mood, right? So if I can do it within myself, and I'm trying to remember the very good thought I had. Yeah, I blocked.
It's okay.
So,
We-
but here's the thing. The other thing is to know that if you know about the prevalence of these situations, if you know how much, because if I have sustained trauma and I'm having symptoms of trauma or I have nightmares and flashbacks, none of us, can you look at anyone around you and see who is an anxious person? Can you say if I'm an anxious person or not? I cannot say. I've had friends I lived with for a long time, and I didn't know this person has anxiety. So a lot of us, you talked about the prevalences, right? 30% anxiety, and we are talking about clinical anxiety, 20-some% depression experiences throughout life, 8% of the general population with PTSD level symptoms of trauma. When you know that this is something a lot of us are suffering from, it's easier to then go get help, because there's not something unusually weird and stupid about me. This is about being a human.
So Arash, let's deal with this from an anonymous person. I was talking too much, but they want to know the connection between anxiety and substance use, that we didn't really address that. And could you just add to that?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about how people try to self-medicate their anxieties, right? I'm feeling very terribly distressed and anxious and worrying, and my heart is pounding. So what is going to help me? I drink a glass of whiskey and it calms down a little bit. Next time I drink 2 shots of whiskey. Next time to slow it down, I drink 4 shots of whiskey. And when I'm basically readjusting my brain by chemistry in relation to anxiety, I'm also teaching my brain that the way to not being anxious is whiskey. So I keep going that route and that route. And we talked about the other side of how addiction influences anxiety because of not only changing the balance in the chemistries in the brain, but also all the psychosocial consequences, all the problems I have at work, I cannot focus, I cannot work. All I'm thinking is the drugs. My social life is unstable. My finances are unstable, and all of that can trigger more anxiety. And I have now more anxiety. Now I want to use more to reduce that anxiety. So it's a cycle that never stops. And this brain keeps fighting. I mean, part of it wants the drug, but the other part keeps fighting to rebalance it back to where it was. And that's why you need more and more to use.
Okay, I'm going to read a comment and then there's a question. In my practice, which is PM&R, physical medicine and rehabilitation, realizing that chronic pain is inextricably linked to anxiety and depression. As such, I employ a model of management based on a cognitive behavioral therapy model tailored to chronic pain to, I believe, very good outcomes, recovering from and rehabilitating out of the chronic pain spiral. In my experience, this approach is less analytical, endeavoring to discover psychologic root causes, and more goal-directed. In other words, working on coping strategies progressively and measurably without as much time, effort used in the analysis arm of the process. Do you ascribe to this set of tools? If not, why not? And if yes, is your experience with it favorable?
So I don't directly deal with chronic pain, but a lot of my patients do have chronic pain. And so One aspect is the psychopharmacology. I give a medication for anxiety and depression, which also helps with chronic pain. And it's not an opioid. It's not an addictive medication. It's not a benzodiazepine. But the other aspect, I agree. A lot of times chronic pain becomes the person's identity. We don't want illness to become someone's identity, because then all of your life is just around. People lose a leg and still go back to their life. They build a life around it. The metaphor a lot of people use is that, let's say right now we have this party, someone comes in and starts, random person starts coming and taking a piece of pizza and starts eating. And all of us get agitated, and you go get into an argument with him and call the police, and the whole thing is like thrown off. Versus saying, okay, this random person came and took a piece of pizza, let him eat the pizza and leave. So that is the approach a lot of times to chronic pain, that, okay, you have this problem. All of us have a problem in life. Now your problem is your chronic pain. How are you going to build a life around it? Do you want this to define you, or do you want, and then it goes to, I agree that it goes to the practical approaches of how can I live my life while I have the chronic pain, versus all of my conversations be around the chronic pain. And I don't know, there's something about pain that sometimes just makes people stick with it. Sometimes some of us have a tendency to just want to sit with the misery that we have. And sometimes my job is to distract them from the misery. Okay, stop sitting in the toilet of the home and smelling what's in there. Move out and let's go to the kitchen and make some food. Yes, ma'am.
So what I heard kind of in this example, but also in the coffee example, the idea of distracting from that desire to continue to fuel this feeling. And that the key to it was some sort of emotional pull. How do you help others find that emotional trigger or that emotional pull that will be stronger than the desire for the substance, or the desire to sit with the waste? Or
So excellent question. I mean, I just remember the memory before even I went to medical school. I was hearing, I'm Iranian. So I was in Iran, and somebody was telling about a guy who was dealing with addiction, opium addiction, for a couple of decades. And then one day he stopped. And he asked him why you stopped. He said, it was my daughter's wedding. And I just was there, and I heard a couple of people are talking. And one of them said, the girl is such a good girl. Her dad is addicted. I don't know why this guy married her. That was the day I stopped. That was the big emotional thing for her, for this guy. For my police officer lady, I talked about how, okay, you're avoiding a lot of social situations because of the trauma. But let's remember that your son is learning about the social life from who? From you. And your avoidance and your fear will impact him. That was a big motivator for her. So I think it depends on each specific person and what really could be a motivator factor and what moved that person. And it's different for each of us. And finding it actually is one of my jobs, and finding what do you want to live for? Why are you, for some people, it's not wanting to be slave to something. I even tell, let me continue with that example. It's absolutely your choice if you want to go to that party or not go. I don't care. What I care about is I don't want you fear to make that decision for you. Now here with this woman, we are talking, especially a person who wants to be in a position of authority, we are talking about her freedom. There's something that has been taken from her in the past also by, let's say, I don't want to go into the details of the experiences this person had. For each of us is a different story, but as long as there's no meaning in my life, as long as there's no fire that moves me, it's very hard. And I'm not much different than a zombie. So, and I think this is an ongoing thing for all of us, because that one thing can become, or two things or three things, become a compass, specifically during the dark times. And now I remembered what I wanted to say in relation to that question, and I could relate here also, is that sometimes when I am dealing with the insecurities, I look at the things that have happened in my life and the things I've gained and earned, the things I've had. Even sometimes, like a research career is terrible. You get a lot of rejections. Sometimes you feel like I cannot be a scientist. I'm stupid. And then I go and look at the recommendation letters people have written for me and about me. That brings me back to my senses. The other way is I say, remember a few wise people in your life. All of us have, right? All of us have at least a couple of wise people in our life. What I say is that when you're lost, when you're terrified, when you're dealing with that thing, think what would that person tell you? What would your wise man, woman, person tell you about the situation? That's how I deal with my insecurities. And that can also be part of the, basically bringing us back to, let's say you're thinking about, okay, I lost my son. This is what happened. What have I done wrong? And think, what would Mario tell me if right now he was here? That helps us get outside of our emotions and drives and desires and have a more reasonable, more logical, more makes sense approach to the situation. And I know that I didn't give a deep and comprehensive answer to your question because there's none. It depends on each person to sit and talk and explore and soul search and see what is in me, what I want, what I have, and where I want to go. But we need to have that. If we don't have that, we are lost. And a lost person can be stolen.
Just wanted to clarify the question you had from the physical.
From the PM&R.
Yes, yeah. I think he said, or she said that they treat with CBT, which is a valuable therapy method. I'm a healthcare professional over 30 years, but the CBT, this person doesn't want to go back to the trauma and to what they went through. Is that enough? What do you just go with there, what they want, or explain that, you know, the trauma's there, it's gonna get in the way? What do you think?
So the question I think here was more for focus on the chronic pain, but in terms of the trauma, there are several evidence-based proven treatments, right? One of them is actually cognitive therapy. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of it is also business. So it was cognitive therapy. Now I changed the name to cognitive processing therapy. It's still the same thing, as a different name and different camp and different training. But the idea is looking at the cognitions and thoughts and perceptions I've created because of my trauma and basically bringing sense to them. Yeah, I didn't get raped because of what I was wearing or what I did or something that I did wrong. I just happened, I say the bird was there when the hungry cat was there. The bird didn't do anything wrong. So just bringing the reality to that, a lot of times it doesn't have a meaning. So anyways, fixing the cognitions, but there's also the behavioral aspect of behavioral therapy, which is the exposure therapy, right? And for that, the treatment is basically exposing yourself to what some exposure methods are to the trauma memories, some are to what I'm avoiding because of my trauma. So CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy is a good treatment. But there are different treatments. There's EMDR, there's the psychopharmacology medications that we prescribe. There are different approaches. And a lot of times psychodynamic approach looks at the adverse experiences I've had in the past and how they've shaped my perception of the current world in the past. I'm not very much into just one specific approach. I'm more of a fan of, okay, what fits this specific person? Because as Maslow says, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to resemble a nail.
Okay. So we're past our cutoff time, so we're going to wrap up. Arash, you're awesome. Let me come over
It's a
here.
pleasure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't get up because I wanted to be in the camera, but
Oh,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
stay in the camera.
No.
So give me a hug.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you doing this.
I appreciate you all. And
And
again,
Don't forget to go on to Amazon and say good things about this book.
if you liked it, if you didn't like it, don't
Read
book.
it. And thank you for coming. We'll let you know about our next meeting. And shortly, we're trying to pull that together and appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.
Thanks so much.